Hello, thanks for tuning in. It's June 15th. Joe Simhart here for another edition of Cults in the Alt Culture. Today, I'm going to talk about something that's been coming up recently in conversations with people online about my background. And people that are in groups that I criticize will immediately look up my name and look up the fact that I was a, quote, deprogrammer, and that I had been arrested and was on trial for a month for an alleged kidnap deprogramming in Idaho. Yes, I was on trial in 1993 for 1 month before a jury. After a lengthy discussion in the court and all the witnesses, the jury decided that I was not guilty of all counts, including misdemeanors, and along with my two peers who were on trial with me at the time. So it was expensive, but we were found not guilty. I'll put a link up if you want to look up that case. It's public, so I'm not hiding anything regarding it. So yeah, I did deprogrammings back in the early days when I got into this business of intervention, and especially from the mid-1980s up until around 1992 was the last time I participated in anything that would be a coercive hold on someone in order to help them reevaluate their cult affiliation. And that was a young woman who was under the control of her weird music teacher, professor at a college. He was using something called applied kinesiology to manipulate the way she viewed reality. Anyway, there was also sexual abuse going on. Family decided to abduct her with her brother and a former cop, and I came in to help talk to her. So, yeah, 1992 was the last one. That young lady, not so young anymore, called me up 25 years later, recently, to thank me for helping her out of that situation because it changed her life for the better. So you can look at those kinds of interventions in many different ways and, claim they're illegal and whatever. Of course, they could be illegal. But a small percentage of my cases back in those days regarded any kind of coercion whatsoever, and over half of them worked out. So some of them didn't, including the one I was on trial for. But there have been people criticizing that part of my life and that part of the whole anti-cult industry that's out there. One of the books that came out in 1981 is this one called The New Vigilantes by Shoup and Bromley, two sociologists who were quite vocal and critical of deprogrammers and cult awareness organizations. And so they do a pretty good outline of what went on back then, somewhat biased because these group of sociologists tended to be quite lenient in their criticism of the so-called cults. Another book that came out, which is a little better about that era of deprogramming and cults, in 1993 by Willa Appel, called Cults in America. This book still holds up. It's very well done, and she actually does a whole chapter on how to get out and does a study of deprogramming with an infamous deprogrammer, Galen Kelly, who describes what he did and how he did it. He was a former cop. And in fact, it was Galen that I worked with on my last coercive type intervention that helped that young woman out of that harmful, manipulative relationship he had with this spiritual music teacher. So what I want to get into is what is this? I mean, people think that you get people out of cults. You don't get them out. You offer people information, dialogue, caring, kindness, education to help them re-evaluate their participation in something or other, whether it's a relationship or a group or a cult or whatever you want to call it, and help them to make another choice. And, obviously you wouldn't talk to them if you didn't think their participation was unhealthy to begin with. But if they see the reasoning behind what you offer over time, in some cases, it could take a year, the person chooses out, and then you have a successful deprogramming, as they say. So the word deprogramming is really, like the word cult, a pejorative. You're not taking anyone, any kind of a program out of somebody, like as if it's a computer. The person that coined that term was Ted Patrick. I have one of his cards here. And you'll notice the Black Lightning. That was his nickname because he used to kidnap people like Black Lightning off the street. And Ted probably did more to damage the whole concept of intervention with people in extremist groups than anybody. And then there's a video out about his technique, which I'll link up. But I would refer you to this book called The Catalyst, How to Change Someone's Mind by Jonah Berger. And this came out recently, a few years ago. It doesn't talk about deprogramming, it doesn't talk about cults, but it talks about changing people's minds. You know, they could be left-wing and changed into right-wing type voters and so forth. And he gives examples of this. But he also tells a story, which I'd like to refer to the listener here, of someone who was a KKK, Ku Klux Klan, neo-Nazi type person that hated Jews and blacks and whatever. And he does a whole case study on this in here. A short version of the case study is in this article that was published by the, I forget what it was. But anyway, I'll put a link to it. But it's an article online, and I'm just going to read it to you because this is an idea of what deprogramming, what intervention, what exit counseling is, without dealing with professionals or whatever, because anyone with knowledge and a caring heart can do this kind of thing. So here we go. In 1991, Larry Trapp was known as the Grand Dragon of the White Knights of the Ku Klux Klan for the realm of Nebraska. In early 1991, Trapp's goal was to turn the Nebraska chapter of the Ku Klux Klan, a hate group dating back to the late 1800s, into one of the most prominent groups of KKK in the United States. In order to achieve his goal, he worked to recruit members, intimidate people of color and Jews, and advance his program for complete annihilation of non-white people. One day in June 1991, Michael Weiser answered his phone only to hear an anonymous voice on the other say, "You will be sorry you ever moved into 5810 Randolph Street, Jew boy." And he hung up. Weiser was the cantor for the Omaha, Nebraska Jewish synagogue. Then 2 days later, Julie Weiser, his wife, pulled an envelope out of the mail addressed to her husband. She opened the package and found a note that read, "The KKK is watching you, scum." The package contained brochures and flyers that claimed that the Holocaust was a lie and that Jews were responsible for America's problems. After the package arrived, the police told the Weisers that they suspected Larry Trapp was responsible for the call and the mail and warned them that Trapp was dangerous, even though he was severely disabled from long untreated diabetes. 2 months passed after the Weisers' receipt of Trapp's hate mail. With no further threats from Trapp, in August 1991, Trapp began broadcasting on a local public channel, a white supremacist television show that was produced by Tom Metzger, the founder of the White Aryan Resistance. So word of the show spread to the Weisers through local newspapers, and after turning in the first show out of curiosity, Michael Weiser called Larry Trapp on the telephone repeatedly and hung up in order to keep Trapp's phone lines busy. You know, so the initial reaction was kind of like harass the harasser. Then Weiser found out that this tactic was not legal. He began occasionally leaving messages on Trapp's answering machine. Michael Weiser left messages asking Trapp why he hated him so much. He told Trapp that Hitler passed laws to kill those people who were disabled, those like Trapp himself, first. One night, after receiving another phone call from Weiser, Trapp picked up the phone and attempted to yell insults at Weiser, who had already hung up. In anger, a few days later, Trapp left a flatulent sound on the greeting of his own answering machine. When Weiser next tried to leave the message, he laughed at the sound and said to the machine, "Sounds like the voice of a master race himself." One night, after receiving another phone call from Weiser, Trapp picked up the phone and attempted to yell insults at Weiser, who had already hung up. In anger, a few days later, The next time Weiser called, Trapp picked up the phone and they began a discussion in which Trapp yelled at Weiser to stop harassing him. Weiser responded by saying that he had no intention of harassing Trapp and asked, at his wife Julie's suggestion, if Trapp needed help getting groceries or anything else because his legs had been amputated. The suggestion caught Trapp by surprise. He politely declined and told Weiser not to call again. Weiser told Trapp that he would be in touch. At the time between August 1991, when Weiser first began calling Trapp, and November, two incidents greatly moved Trapp. First, one of Trapp's former nurses, Monica Kuhn, sent him a letter that explained the concept of Christian love. Later, Trapp was brought to tears when a Vietnamese woman helped him onto the elevator when she noticed he was blind. Anyway, on 12 November, Trapp decided to stop airing his show on the public broadcasting station. In an interview about the decision, he said that while he was still a member of the Klan, he now blamed the U.S. government and felt it was time to work for equal rights for everyone. The following day, 13 November, Weiser called Trapp and asked about the changes in his life, and Trapp explained that he was trying to make changes, but told Weiser that he did not want his help or friendship. 2 days after this phone call, Weiser called Trapp, caught him on television screaming at reporters and using racial slurs. Weiser called Trapp and yelled at him for using such hateful speech, and Larry apologized. Later that same night, Trapp called the Weisers, explaining that he wanted out, but did not know how to get out. Michael and Julie Weiser then went over to the Trapp's house to talk to him. When they arrived, Trapp handed over his swastika rings, begging the Weisers to take them away. They gave him a ring, to take them away. They gave him a ring in return that they had coincidentally brought as a gift. They spent the night eating dinner together and discussing Trapp's hate-filled past. On 18 November 1991, Larry formally resigned from the KKK and then wrote resignation letters to the other hate groups that he belonged to. After these resignations, he began sending apologies to all of the people he had been harassing. He also contacted law enforcement officials in order to give them all the information he had about the Klan and the actions of its members. During this process, the Weisers brought Trapp to their congregation, cleaned his apartment, and eventually invited him to move in with them when his health began to fail. Even with his failing health, Trapp tried to persuade other Klan members and incarcerated youth to follow his example. On 5 June 1992, Larry Trapp converted to Judaism at Michael Weiser's synagogue, a building he had previously planned to blow up that very summer. He died 3 months later, holding the hands of Michael and Julie Weiser. So, that's one example. There are hundreds of ways to do this, interventions. This was a classic case of opposites, in a sense, coming together because someone who was more ethical than the cult person reached out, tried to be kind to him, and eventually, because of other circumstances, and apparently Larry Trapp had a conscience, and he began to change and to reflect. His human reason took over and realized that what he had been thinking all along was really constricted, hate-filled thought. It wasn't reality, and he changed. Now, Trapp grew up in an abusive household, so you can see he was set up emotionally to become a hate-filled person, a neo-Nazi, a KKK member, a way to get revenge on society and to find scapegoats for his hate, Jews, blacks, Asian people, Catholics, whatever. So that's one example. And all this book does, the catalyst, is explain that story in many different ways. How can you change someone's mind? It's really about a series of interactions. One is called active listening. When you encounter someone like that, you get them to tell their story, you listen to them, you add some information, you gain some rapport, you tell them a little bit about your story, which is all that happens during deprogramming and interventions of any kind, whether you call them exit counselings or whatever. It's a way of gaining rapport and then sharing with that person and their family your view of the group the person's in. You give them a positive spin, what the group says it's about, what it's supposedly teaching. And then you look at the criticisms, and slowly over time, usually 3 days, sometimes 4 days, 10-hour days are not unusual in these conversations. Most people will begin to change their mind, because most human beings don't want to be delusional, don't want to be wrong, don't want to be lying to people, don't want to hate other people. Some do. You can try all you want to talk to those kinds of people, and you're going to get shut down. A good 40% of my over 500 interventions with people that took quite a bit of time didn't work out right away. Some did later. Some never did. Some people stayed in the cult till they died. So anyway, I just wanted to give you a little better insight into this. If you want to go back to that era, that time that I'm accused of being the deprogrammer, somebody that I shouldn't listen to because of my past. Well, read this book and you get a better idea of what that era was really about. And it's a lot more sophisticated and interesting than just some stereotype about people like me that had once done so-called kidnap deprogrammings. Anyway, with that, I'll leave it, and hopefully you have a good day. Enjoy your spring. Bye-bye.